Okay, hello and welcome to a Premier League Game Week 11 preview. Hopefully you guys are all okay. If you are here live, before starting, if you could just confirm everything is working okay, and then I will get started. All good, perfect. Thank you, Narinda. So today we've got 5 games to cover. Welcome to another live stream. After a busy week of European action, we return to the Premier League. Game week 11 now, so we're getting along. Feels like it's flown by. Feels like it's absolutely flown by. But thank you all for tuning in. If you are here live, feel free to leave your bets in the comments, or if you're watching after this has been posted, feel free to comment and I will happily get back to you. So, without wasting any more time, the first game to cover is Crystal Palace against Fulham. 3 p.m. kickoff at Selhurst Park. Crystal Palace extended their unbeaten run to 3 games after drawing last weekend to Wolves. Could have been 3 straight wins for them, but they had a late Mateta winner chalked off, so sort of finding a bit of form under Glasner. For Fulham, they somehow pulled out a win in Monday night against Brentford with 2 injury time goals from Harry Wilson. And that win worked to move them into the top half of the table. So 2 teams in a sort of bit of confidence after sort of positive results in the last game. So that's something to just keep an eye on. In terms of the injury reports, for Palace we have quite a notable injury list, which contains Adam Wharton, Eze, Lerma and Will Hughes now, after he accumulated his 5th league yellow card. So we'll likely get a midfield duo of Kamada and Chikdikore. More on that sort of later, because I think that is an interesting sort of angle to take advantage of. For Fulham, it's much less of a headache for Marco Silva, who only has Sasha Lukic out. So we'll likely see a familiar pairing in the midfield of Andres Pereira and Sander Berger. We could see Adama Traore reintroduced. He was dropped on Monday for Reece Nelson, but I think this is more of a sort of fixture he can take advantage of, so I wouldn't be surprised to see him back in the starting lineup. So, first angle is to do with, as mentioned, Chikdikore and Daichi Kamada, who are expected to line up in midfield for Palace. I mentioned this last week that with key players out for Glasner, we can look to take advantage of that. I think we've got 1 or 2 games before one game before the international break, so after that period we won't have this opportunity again. So whilst we do have it, we can take advantage of it. So it's the midfield pairing for Palace that get into a lot of duels. The way they sort of play, they are quite aggressive. And we saw that last game against Wolves. So on screen, here are the stats from the sort of 3 midfielders that featured in that game. So we obviously had Will Hughes start alongside Kamada. Kamada played the full 90. And in that time, he had 15 ground duels, winning just 4, 1 aerial duel as well. He had 1 foul, 3 tackles, 3 dribbled passes. So very, very high sort of defensive metrics there. For Will Hughes, he played 80 minutes. He made 2 fouls, 1 tackle, 2 dribbled passes, but he got in 9 ground duels and he won just 1. So those 2 were heavily involved. I did mention last week that obviously Wolves are quite a good matchup for targeting opposition midfield stats because of the way they play. They're quite sort of they rely on progression through dribbling. They have quite strong carriers in Mateus Cunha, Ryan Nouri, even like Semedo. These are players who sort of take the ball, look to get forward, and in doing so, they're quite adept at drawing fouls and drawing tackles, especially in midfield. Fulham are actually quite a similar matchup in that sense, and I really do like it if Adama starts this. I think they have sort of wingers who look to get on the ball, look to progress the ball through their dribbling. If you think of, obviously Adama is the obvious example, but you've also got like Iwobi, Emil Smith-Rowe. These are all good players that the sort of Crystal Palace midfielders will get in duels with for this game. So I think it's a good matchup for them. Now, obviously, Will Hughes will be out for this game, so you would imagine Kamada starts and plays the full 90 again, most likely alongside Decore, who came on for 10 minutes in that game against Wolves in what was his third appearance of the season. So since he had his Achilles injury, he's been very, very on and off. Game time has been very reduced. And when he returned against Wolves, he looked very, very rusty, I thought, with his challenges. He made one foul. He was dribbled past twice, so he attempted 2 tackles, failed both of them, and that's in just a 10-minute spell. 3 ground duels, 0-1. So didn't look at his best, and against the Fulham side, where he might be looking to actually play the full 90 with such few options in midfield, really is one to target for fouls and tackles here, but more for fouls. Based on all of that information, some of the best prices that stand out for this game, we've got Kamada 2 or more fouls at 1.91 with Paddy. A bit too short, I would say. Would ideally like that to be odds against, but we can sort of be a bit creative in terms of adding Fulham players to draw a foul to try and boost that with a correlated stat. However, for Decore, you can get 2 or more fouls at 2.7 with Paddy Power, which I think looks really, really inflated, and I would expect that to drop. His sort of data of himself is not great because he played the full season in the 2022-23 season under Patrick Vieira. Obviously, that's a very different style to what he'll be asked to do under Glasner. He's only played, I think, the equivalent of 90 minutes over the last 2 seasons, so not much to go for him. But just based on the eye test of how he played against Wolves, looked very rusty, looked very rushed in his play. And I think against a Fulham side, he will struggle, especially if he has to play sort of 90 minutes. So 2.7 for 2 or more fouls, with ladder potential, I would say. For Kamada, you can get 3 or more tackles at 1.85 with William Hill, which again, I think is a really nice price. Because he made 3 out of 6 tackles last game against Wolves. And again, I would imagine he plays the full 90 in a decent matchup. He's also 8.5 with 365 to be carded, which I think is a massive, massive price. Most sort of other books have got him around sort of the 3-1 sort of price. I would expect him to shorten a bit. But just on the surface, that sort of 7-1 for him to be carded is pretty big. Moving on to a second angle is a sort of familiar one if you watched the stream last week. It's for Nketiah to register a shot on target and have 2 or more shots. So as predicted, he did shift into the Eze role, and he will likely do that again with Eze still out, which naturally makes him a target for shots. Nketiah himself is more of sort of a shoot-first player. He's quite selfish in his play, again, which is a good thing for backing him for this kind of stuff. And he landed this selection last week, so that's sort of a good sign. He comes out at 1.75 with Bet365 for him to have 2 or more shots with 1 on target. I think Fulham are a good matchup away. Fulham at home are obviously quite a different side to how they perform away. They're a lot more solid at home compared to away. So I don't mind backing sort of opposition shots for Crystal Palace in this game. And yeah, Nketiah is the one that stands out. One thing I did mention is how the loss of Eze would impact the sort of forward line for Palace. I said it would have a negative impact on Mateta, but a positive impact on Nketiah. We didn't really see that too much against Wolves. I thought Nketiah was quite quiet. But one thing that did sort of change was how Mateta sort of approached his play. We saw him more focused on sort of dropping deeper, actually. And he sort of caught the eye for his strength. He was very, very hard to dispossess, and he sort of utilised that to create some really high quality chances for his side. Now the focus here is for him to actually draw a foul, which he didn't manage to do against Wolves, but I think it was notable how much more he saw the ball, especially in sort of midfield areas, sort of dropping in between the lines, and we didn't really see him do that much at the start of the season when Eze was around. And I think that makes sense. if you think about replacing Eze with a player like Nketiah, you're not going to get quite the same chance creation. And I think Mateta sort of resorted to try and creating his own chances, which we saw against Wolves. He's currently priced at 1.62 to draw a foul with Sky, which has landed in just 5 out of 13 games so far. So it is sort of more of a rogue selection. But if we can get this sort of around 1 point sort of evens or so when more books open up, I haven't yet checked every single book for this market, but if we can get sort of evens price, I think that looks really nice just based on how you sort of approach that game against Wolves. Kamada 3+ stack was 2.2 with Sky. Yeah, really like that price. I think when I checked this last night, Sky hadn't released their markets. I haven't had the opportunity to check today, but 2.2 is a very good price, and I would sort of expect it to shorten to around evens or 1.83, that kind of price. But yeah, thank you for that. And I think there's good potential for ladders there actually, especially if he has to play the 90, which I think is likely. So I think the first game, Palace against Fulham, has quite a lot of potential actually. Really liking the matchup. Moving on to Brighton against Man City, 5:30 kickoff at the Amex, so televised game. Brighton were dealt successive losses against Liverpool, first in the EFL Cup and then a 2-1 loss at Anfield. After taking the lead early in that game, quick-fire goals from Gakpo and Salah secured the win for Liverpool, which puts them top of the league. Brighton, I thought, were really positive though. They gave a good account of themselves, and I think that bodes well when they're facing a City team who are sort of licking their wounds. They obviously lost midweek to Sporting, and that was their third successive defeat. Very rare for them, or rare for sort of someone to say that about a Pep Guardiola side. But I think the game against Sporting was a damning defeat. I think 4-1. It's more than just like a loss. It's a thrashing, and you don't see that very often with a Man City side. We haven't seen that very often over the last few years with Pep Guardiola. So that is something to sort of account for, how they will bounce back from that. But more on that later again. In terms of the injury report, Brighton have got 8 players listed, which is not ideal. A lot of these guys are 50-50s as well, which makes team sheet prediction a bit more of a challenge. We could see Lewis Dunk return at centre-back. We could see Baleba return in midfield. He was on the bench as an unused substitute against Liverpool. And Minte will also be pushing for a start. For City, it's a bit more positive for them, as De Bruyne and Doku return off the bench against Sporting midweek, as some sort of bonus in that game. But I think the absence of Rodri is really being felt by them now. I think games have just been a lot more chaotic, and that is something we can sort of take advantage of. It presents an opportunity to take advantage of. I think from a sort of Pep Guardiola point of view, whenever you get dealt such a damning defeat as they did against Sporting, I think it's more natural for them to sort of revert back to the basics. And what I mean by that is sort of focusing first and foremost on just having a solid defence so they don't concede 4 goals again. Because of that, I wouldn't be surprised if Guardiola opts for a change in system. I think this game could be a bit difficult to predict in that sense. But I do think we get a sort of more passive and boring game where City are very intent on just controlling possession, controlling the game as much as possible, and sort of limiting chances for Brighton. I hope I'm wrong though. I think Brighton have been a sort of front-footed team. They've been really entertaining to watch, and that was sort of exemplified in their last game against Liverpool. In that game, duels were sort of one to focus on, as Brighton had 18 fouls, 18 tackles, and Liverpool had 10 fouls and 28 tackles in return. So it was quite a duel-heavy contest. In terms of sort of predicting matchups, Joe Veltman for Brighton is always a player to keep an eye on for me because of his propensity to draw fouls. He's very willing to sort of hit the ground by contact, and I like to target whoever is playing on the left wing against him. Obviously, we mentioned Doku returning. Whether he is fit enough to start against Brighton is yet to be seen. But I think if he can start, he will. I think it would make sense for Guardiola to just go with a sort of bog standard Doku on the left, Savinho on the right. as he sort of did at the start of the season, which yielded very, very positive results. So my sort of initial angle is to go for a sort of Doku foul, Veltman foul drawn, and that comes out at 2.25 with Sky. Alternatively, you could just play the Doku foul as a single, which is 1.83 with Sky, which looks pretty big considering the same bet is 1.44 with Paddy Power. So notable discrepancy in those markets there, something to potentially take advantage of. Alternatively, we have seen Matheus Nunes start at left wing for a lot of games this season, especially recently. And if he is to start there again, he's 1.91 to commit a foul. And his data is actually much, much better than Doku. So I think Doku has been sort of very limited in his minutes, hasn't started too many games this season. But when he hasn't been exactly ideal for fouls. I think he's only made a maximum of one foul when he started. But Matheus Nunes has been much, much better for making fouls. So if we look at his sort of recent starts, he made a foul in that's 6 out of 7, including 3 fouls against Southampton. So he is a bit more aggressive in his play. He's a bit more of a better one to target for fouls. And he was booked against Sporting and conceded a penalty in that game. So he's a bit more willing to draw. But if we do see Doku, we can sort of guarantee that he will see a lot of the ball. And a lot of the time, if he is just finding a lot of draws with Veltman, chances are he will foul him across if we are to play sort of 90 minutes together. So I like those two potential angles. We'll sort of need to see who starts, I would imagine, but those two prices look pretty decent. Next angle is an interesting one. It's in regards to Haaland. Obviously, he hasn't been at his best in the last 2 games, blanked in the last 2. He had a lot of chances against Sporting and couldn't find the net. Obviously missed a penalty, hit the bar. But I think books have massively overreacted to that game against Sporting. Obviously, City find themselves in a bit of a rut of form, but Haaland has continued to sort of receive chances. He's had a lot of big chances, and he's currently priced at 1.9 to score any time, 4-1 for a brace, and he's evens for 2 or more shots on target, which I think you just really don't see these kind of lines for Haaland very often. And you'd sort of expect it for if he's playing against Arsenal at the Emirates, Liverpool at Anfield, or in a tough European fixture. You wouldn't expect these lines for a game against Brighton away. With respect to Brighton, they're just not sort of that calibre of matchup. I think Haaland should really be looking to get on the score sheet at least in this game. In addition to that, De Bruyne obviously returned against Sporting, and with City in the rut of form, I would imagine if he can start, he will start. These two, Haaland and De Bruyne, played the full 90 together in the first 4 league games this season. In that time, Haaland scored 9 goals. He scored 2 hat-tricks against Ipswich and West Ham. He scored a brace against Brentford. So I think the variable of De Bruyne being reintroduced changes a lot. And I really, really like Haaland's chances for sort of breaking out of it's not really a bad run of form because he's only failed to score in 2 games, but getting on the score sheet at least. I'd also sort of had my eyes on hat-trick. I think he is sort of due a regression against Sporting. He had, I think, 1.5 XG or so, 3 shots on target, missed a penalty. So the chances are still coming for him. The chances will come more often if De Bruyne was to start. And I don't think Brighton are a particularly tough matchup. They obviously conceded 5 goals across the 2 games to Liverpool. And City are just as potent in the attacking third. So it's a buy low spot for Haaland. I think we will likely not get these kind of lines again. So when we do get them, I think we do have to take advantage. 2 or more shots on target has landed in 12 out of 15 this season for him, 80%, and he's priced at evens to repeat that. So quite a notable discrepancy. Next angle is a bit of an interesting one actually. It's for Kyle Walker to register over 1.5 tackles at 2.25 with Bet365. And it's based off how Trent actually responded last game against Brighton. Trent is obviously not notorious for his defensive capabilities, but he made 9 tackles out of 12 attempted in that game, which is, I think, probably the highest amount of tackles he's made in his career in a single game. Walker, in a similar sense, is not really notorious for sort of high tackle counts, but the focus here is on the matchup between him and Mitoma. So if we look into opposition right backs against Brighton, we had Trent with 9 tackles out of 12. We had Conor Bradley make 3 tackles in the EFL Cup. We had Nelson Semedo make 6 tackles. Livramento made 0. So we'll ignore him. But Porro made 4. Gusto made 4. Pedro Lima made 4. Tuanzebe made 3 for Ipswich. And Ben White made 4 as well. Again, I think that Ben White one is an important bit of data because sort of he's in a similar group as Trent and Walker in the sense that he doesn't really register too many tackles. So for him to make 4 sort of jumps out. If we look into Walker's tackle data, again, absolutely nothing special whatsoever this season. He's only started in 5 games. He's made 2 tackles in just 2 of those, so nothing screaming out. But it's just purely a matchup play. Mitoma is expected to start as his matchup, and he actually ranks 3rd in the league of all players this season for total attempted take-ons. So he's attempted 52 take-ons from 9.290, so around sort of 5 to 6 attempted take-ons per game, and he's being tackled an average of 55% of the time. So based on that, let's say Mitoma is to attempt to take on Walker 6 times. He's tackled 50% of those times, 3 times. That gives Walker 3 tackles. And he's already priced at odds against to make 2 tackles. So I do think there is a lot of potential. It's obviously not based on Walker's data, but over 2.5 tackles at 4.3 looks, I think, a really nice price. I think there's good value to be taken there. Walker was obviously rested midweek. You would imagine he plays something close to full 90 against Brighton. So really liking that one. That is all for that game. Next game to focus on is Liverpool against Aston Villa, which is an 8 o'clock kickoff at Anfield. This will be a daunting fixture for Aston Villa, given just how strong Liverpool have looked in recent weeks. They made full use of both Arsenal and Man City dropping points on the weekend by securing a comeback against Brighton to put them 2 points clear at the top of the table. And it's been completely deserved. I think since that loss to Nottingham Forest at Anfield, Arne Slot has overseen 11 wins and 1 draw from his 12 games. The 1 draw being against Arsenal at the Emirates, so sort of one that you can sort of write off. They're in top form coming into this one. They're top of the league, top of the Champions League, and we saw an interesting change in that game against Leverkusen as Luis Diaz plays as a centre forward. I will touch on that a bit more later on. But for Aston Villa, they had a midweek Champions League game to contend with, and they were away in Belgium, which they lost 1-0. They also lost 4-1 to Spurs last time out in the league, so they're sort of coming into this game in a bit of a poor run of form, which does not bode well for them at all. On the injury report, Jota remains out, so we'll likely see Nunes lead the line, I would imagine. Arne Slot sort of mentioned how he played Luis Diaz up front to sort of throw Jonathan Tah off his game. However, I would imagine Nunes comes back in. He started the last 2 league games in the absence of Jota, so I think that just makes more sense. And against the sort of high line of Aston Villa, I think Nunes sort of has the ability to really take advantage of that. For Aston Villa, we saw Morgan Rogers subbed against Spurs on the weekend, but he did return midweek in Belgium, so you'd imagine he gets a start and plays something close to full 90 if he doesn't get injured again. The first angle for me is for Darwin Núñez to register 2 or more fouls, which is priced at 2.5 with Sky. It's landed in 5 out of 7 this season when he's played 60 minutes or more, and I do expect him to start. I think even though Luis Diaz obviously bagged a hat-trick, Gakpo's been in great form, and Salah is undroppable, I do think Núñez gets a start. Just because he has a sort of skill set to really take advantage of this matchup against Aston Villa. I think when talking about Núñez, you have to sort of consider that he's not the same player as he was last season under Klopp. He's a lot more disciplined, and he deserves a lot more. He deserves a lot of credit for that, I would say. He's a lot more sort of measured and controlled in his play, not as erratic as he was under Klopp. And because of that, I think last season I'd probably be looking at the sort of Núñez offside, Núñez shots on target kind of angles, but he just hasn't been as good for targeting those sort of markets this season. So fouls are where to go. He's averaging 2.12 fouls per 90, and he draws a good matchup against Ezri Konsa, who's expected to start at centre back. I think those two should find a lot of duels together. Konsa obviously has a tendency to go down quite easily under contact, so could see some quite soft fouls conceded by Núñez, which would be ideal. Sticking with duels, I also really like Morgan Rogers to draw a foul. Obviously, I mentioned this one last week as well. But in games like this, where his sort of dribbling ability will be relied upon to carry Aston Villa forward from their sort of defensive half, Morgan Rogers is the one player that sort of stands out as the person to do that. I think he's the only person in that team that can really carry the ball strongly. And if you look into his fouls drawn data against sort of similar teams in similar matchups, he's drawn 2 fouls against Spurs, and that was despite obviously going off injured in the 70th minute. He drew 2 fouls against Man United, and he drew 2 fouls against Bayern Munich. So he has good potential in those last 2 games as well against Man United and Bayern Munich. He played the full 90 in those, so he is an important player for Villa in these kind of games. And yeah, again, barring any sort of mitigating circumstances, would imagine he plays the entire game against Liverpool, especially if the game remains close. He also drew 1 foul against Arsenal at home earlier in the season. You can actually pair that with Szoboszlai to commit a foul, which has landed in 11 out of 12 starts this season for Liverpool, and that comes out at 1.75 with Sky. Obviously a bit on the shorter side, but you get 2 correlated stats that have fantastic hit rates for the season, and it's close enough to evens. I think you could definitely ladder the 2 as well, potentially going 2 Szoboszlai fouls, 2 Rogers fouls drawn. The only sort of worry I would have with that is Szoboszlai doesn't have a sort of safe minutes floor, or it's not as safe as, say, a McAllister or a Gravenberch. So I'd probably be leaning more towards Morgan Rogers to draw 2 or more fouls, which is actually priced at 2.88 with Sky, which again, based on sort of relevant games that I've mentioned, looks a pretty big price again. The next person that I want to sort of focus on a bit more for this game is Onana in midfield for Aston Villa. Against Spurs, his performance really stood out to me. His sort of physicality in midfield was absolutely essential. He was all over the pitch, even though Spurs obviously won that game 4-1. I think it would have been a lot worse without Onana. He really helped out his defence. He was extremely willing to duel in midfield. And looking into his stats, he made 5 fouls in that game. He made 3 tackles and was dribbled past twice. So in his 90 minutes, he contested a lot of duels, really put himself about. And I think it'll be a similar game against Liverpool, in the sense that he'll have a lot of defensive work to do. He'll draw matchups against very good players for drawing fouls on the side of Liverpool, and for him to make tackles as well. So his physicality is really essential in this game. Again, his minutes haven't been particularly safe under Emery so far, but I think just based on how important he will be, we could see him play another 90 minutes. He was rested midweek in Belgium, which I think is a good sign. Tielemans obviously played the full 90 in that game, so would imagine Onana starts here at least, and we're sort of hoping for an 80 minutes floor. And I think 80 minutes against a side like Liverpool at Anfield, you're really targeting him to sort of make or get in a lot of duels. So the price that stands out for me is Onana to make 2 or more fouls, which is 1.83 with Paddy. Obviously a bit on the shorter side, would rather get that odds against, so could be forced to be a bit creative with sort of pairing that with a correlated stat. For example, Gravenberch should draw a foul, McAllister's draw a foul, just something along those lines. But I do like that as an initial sort of angle. For this game, I will be dedicating some time this weekend to writing an extended thread, sort of finalising all the angles. I appreciate I've been a bit vague, but all of that will be finalised over on Twitter, which I'll hopefully be posting tomorrow. So make sure you are following me there already if you're not already. Next game, moving on to Sunday, is Nottingham Forest against Newcastle, 2 p.m. kickoff at the City Ground. Nottingham Forest are currently flying. They're third, just behind Liverpool and Man City, led by the goal-scoring exploits of Chris Wood. They've won each of their last 3 games, most recently beating West Ham 3-0 with a clinical display. For Newcastle, they had no midweek game, so they've had a week to prepare after beating Arsenal 1-0 at St James's Park. They've been quite an inconsistent side, difficult to predict in terms of their results, difficult to bet on because of that. But this is one of the games that I think really stands out for me this weekend. I think it has the potential to be quite an entertaining one. It's 2 sort of sides whose play styles marry up quite nicely to back goals. In terms of the injury report, we still have Danilo and Sangare out for Nottingham Forest, but Ward-Prowse is back. He was suspended, then he was left out of the squad, and then he was unavailable to face his parent club. He's back now, but I doubt he starts, just based on how well the duo of Ryan Yates and Dominguez have been performing in that holding midfield role. We did see Elliot Anderson drop to the bench when Morgan Gibbs-White returned in the last game, so I would imagine we see an unchanged midfield trio from Nuno Santo. There's no new injury concerns for Newcastle. We saw them obviously opt for a more defensive lineup against Arsenal with the extra midfielder. But with Jacob Murphy doubtful for this game, I would imagine that lineup stays very similar. Potentially we see Tonali reintroduced to the lineup as Willock was substituted early in that game, but I thought Willock performed really well. He's a fantastic asset in that midfield for Newcastle, so I think if Eddie Howe can get him to start, he will start. First angle for me is backing goals in this game. I think when I say the 2 play styles marry up nicely, what I mean by that is Forest are very, very effective on the break with the likes of Elanga, with the likes of Hudson-Odoi, Morgan Gibbs-White. They are a very effective counter-attacking team, and that is no surprise given that Nuno Espirito Santo is their manager. I think they can really exploit a Newcastle midfield and defence who are quite weak in transition. I think that's where their main vulnerability lies. I think they're a very physical side. When they can sit in their defensive shape, they're brilliant, absolutely excellent team, Newcastle. But whenever you ask them to defend a transition is where they struggle. And that's where Forest's main strength lies. It's difficult to actually envision Forest keeping a clean sheet though against Newcastle, just because of how potent they are going forward as well, with the likes of Isak, Gordon, even Joe Linton, who's found a bit of good form this season. So first angle is actually for both teams to score, which is priced at 1.7, which is quite high for a Premier League game nowadays. I think you're normally looking at an average price of around 1.5, but goals seems to be a bit undervalued here. And that's something that I'm looking to take advantage of. Also, both teams to score on over 2.5 goals is priced at 2.2. Again, wouldn't expect that market to be odds against. So I think it's a target. If we look into head-to-head matchups, these sides faced off in the EFL Cup earlier in the season, and that game finished 1 each at the City Ground, but it really could have been more because there were chances at either end. It also finished 3-2 to Newcastle at the City Ground last season. Bruno Guimaraes bagged a brace in that game. And 3-1 to Forest at St James's Park. So in both games, this away side prevailed in this matchup. And in that latter game, we obviously saw a memorable Chris Wood hat-trick. So goals is the first target for me here. Both teams to score at 1.7 as a minimum. But the next thing for me is to target fouls in midfield. So we will likely see the matchup between Ryan Yates and Bruno Guimaraes. We've got two players who are very aggressive in their duels, quite high foul counts, but they're also very, very effective at drawing fouls. Yates this season is averaging 1.64 fouls per 90. He made 4 fouls in the last head-to-head against Newcastle at the City Ground. But he's also drawing 2.77 fouls per 90 with 13 fouls drawn in his last 5 starts, playing the full 90 in each of those games. So he's one to target in that respect. For Bruno Guimaraes, his opposite number, he's the most fouled player in the league this season. Fouled at least twice in every single start with an average of 4 fouls drawn per game. So pretty ridiculous numbers there for the Brazilian. He's actually also only behind Joe Linton on total fouls committed. He's averaging 1.43 fouls per 90 in the league, with at least 1 foul in 9 out of 11. Two or more fouls in 6 out of 11 as well. So he draws a good matchup against Yates. His data is good, and it's the same for Yates. If we actually look into Bruno Guimaraes this season, his FB ref, you can see he's drawn the most fouls in the entire league by quite some distance as well. He's drawn 41 in 10 games, and his teammate Anthony Gordon is second with just 25. So Guimaraes definitely one to target for fouls drawn. And that's actually my first potential angle for this game. It's for Guimaraes to draw over 2.5 fouls, which is priced at 2.0 with Paddy Power. Understandably, the lines that we've got so far are very, very short for fouls, but that is one that stands out given that it's landed in every away game so far, and in 80% of games this season for Guimaraes, so 80% hit rate, priced at 2.0. I make that pretty good value. On a similar note, looking to take advantage of his matchup with Ryan Yates, he's priced at 2.25 with Bet365 to commit 2 or more fouls, which is again a nice price, slightly above the sort of market average 365, so they could shorten. Also, Joe Linton to commit 2 or more fouls at 1.66 with Bet365 is slightly short to take as a single, but sort of a price that stands out given his sort of ridiculous data this season. One thing I will mention though is for Joe Linton, he typically sees a boost in fouls when playing at home and a boost in fouls when playing against sort of bigger opposition. So maybe one to ignore for him just based on that. Guimaraes was first fouled. Yeah, exactly. So Z, thank you for that comment. Basically just saying that the Guimaraes to be fouled over 2.5 times has landed in 5 out of 5 games against Forest. So head-to-head data looks fantastic. Season data so far looks fantastic, and he's priced at 2.0. So really, really liking that as a single. That is just one to watch. I think potential alternative angles would be to wait for sort of foul involvements markets. If we're thinking that Bruno Guimaraes to be fouled is a good price, and Guimaraes to make fouls is a good price, could be looking at sort of the foul involvements just to be a bit more safer. Also, player foul matchups when they open up. I'll be keeping an eye on that. So make sure you're following me on Twitter. Again, probably be posting some of those. So I'll be looking out for sort of Joe Linton to foul Yates, Guimaraes to foul Yates, and vice versa. That will be it for the Forest Newcastle game. And the final game of the week that I'll be covering is Chelsea against Arsenal. Probably the biggest game of the weekend, London derby, saving the best until last. Chelsea will face a side called Noah midweek in the Conference League, and you would imagine that they play their sort of second string 11 to give the main starters enough prep time. They were able to salvage a draw against Man United in the league last time out, as Caicedo scored a tidy volley after Robert Sanchez conceded a penalty. For Arsenal, they've slipped into 5th, another team in a sort of poor run of form. Winners in their last 3 games. They lost 1-0 to Newcastle last time out, and I think it was fully deserved. They failed to create sort of any memorable chances. Even midweek, they lost 1-0 to Inter Milan, so they find themselves in a real rut of form right now. Not ideal for them. And this is a big game. This is a very, very big game for them, I would say. Winless in 4 would be sort of catastrophic for their title hopes. and it is a very, very big game. Away at Stamford Bridge, not an easy matchup, but they'll be desperate for sort of 3 points. Moving on to the injury report, we have a small injury list for Chelsea, but it does contain Cole Palmer, which is notable. He seemed to pick up a knock at the weekend. However, I would imagine he starts. I think if there is even a chance he can play, he will play, just because of how important he is under Enzo Maresca. So we likely see a sort of familiar Chelsea 11. It's that sort of team that plays week in, week out in the Premier League. For Arsenal, they had Gabriel return in the last game, so they will only be without sort of Odegaard and Calafiori from their sort of first choice 11. Sterling will notably not feature, as he is unable to face his parent club, so we could see more minutes for Saka, or at least a safer minutes floor. Again, more on that later. I think this is a banana skin fixture. I mentioned this a lot last week, that there was a lot of banana skin fixtures or games difficult to predict, but overall we navigated them well enough. And we did that by sort of targeting value singles and angles that were correlated. So I think we're going to try and do something similar for this game again. The strategy being to sort of keep it light, stick to plus money single bets. Kind of going against that a bit with the first selection, but it's for Saliba to make 2 or more tackles, which has been a familiar angle over the last few weeks. I just think it's been such a good play, and we get, again, a really good price of 1.9 with 365 for this to occur. Whenever Arsenal play a sort of front-footed team in which defensively they will be involved, I just think Saliba to make 2 or more tackles is just an automatic play. It's landed in 9 out of 14 games this season. If we look into those losses, one was against Bournemouth, where he was sent off after 30 minutes with 1 tackle. One was against Southampton, where he blanked, Shakhtar, where he blanked, and Preston. So those 3 games, Arsenal were obviously very, very dominant. If we see, if we sort of watch those games, we'll see Saliba getting into very, very few ground duels. So it's no surprise he made no tackles in those games. The other failure was surprisingly against Inter Milan in the recent game. Didn't back him to make tackles because I was sort of unfamiliar with how Inter Milan would approach the game. But he made 1 tackle, he was dribbled past once, and he made 2 fouls. So the duels were there, which is encouraging. I think the only thing is he was very inefficient, and that isn't usually the case with Saliba. You very rarely see him sort of dribbled past. He's very strong in his duels. He's sort of more likely to make a tackle than a foul, I would say. So I'm going to just sort of write that one off as an anomaly game. For the game against Chelsea, I think it's a great matchup. We should see him draw duels with Nicholas Jackson, who sees quite a lot of the ball for Chelsea. So again, 1.9 to make 2 more tackles, given that it's landed 9 out of 14 games this season, looks a cracking price once again. Second potential angle is one that I played last season in both head-to-head games, and it's for Cucurella and Saka to make 1 foul each and draw 1 foul each. So essentially for Saka to foul Cucurella and for Cucurella to foul Saka. We get the main line, 1 each, priced at 2.6 with Paddy, and 2 each at 16.2, 15 to 1 with Paddy. And notably, this landed in both games last season between these two, so they are sort of familiar foes. They enjoy the matchup against each other, and they have a bit of history. Extending the sample season past last season, they've actually faced each other in the 22-23 season. They faced each other once in that game, and again, the 2+ landed. So the question really is, will Cucurella start? And at the moment, I'm sort of leaning towards no, because we've typically seen sort of Reece James and Malo Gusto be the fullbacks for Chelsea, with Cucurella sort of demoted to that sort of second string starting 11 that starts in the European competitions. But we did see in the last game a bit of a change from Maresca. So we saw Reece James actually start on the left, Malo Gusto start on the right, and Gusto was substituted at half-time for Cucurella, who then went over to the left. So I think how Chelsea line up today against Noah will reveal everything. But here are the sort of scenarios that we have. I think if we get Gusto starting today against Noah, it will be Cucurella and Reece James as the fullbacks, in which case it will be Cucurella against Saka, which is ideal, which means we can sort of back this bet. However, if we see Cucurella start, then it means we'll likely see, it's difficult to say actually, but probably Gusto on the left, Reece James on the right, in which case we will be sort of more intrigued in backing Gusto tackles than Gusto fouls, but we'll have to wait for today. Again, this game is quite far away. It's on Sunday, so we're not really looking to take any bets right away. We're not in any sort of rush. So what I will be doing is keeping these just as leans for now. And once we get a bit more information on how both teams might line up, we will take bets. So I will be posting a Twitter thread on Saturday. So again, make sure you follow me there. For the sort of third potential angle would be for Gabriel to have a shot. I haven't taken him too much this season. Reason being, I don't typically like to back centre-backs to have a shot whenever the sort of only scenario we're waiting for is a set piece. I think it's just not really ideal. But for this game, there's sort of a bit more reasoning behind it. The Fofana and Gusto foul, I like the Fofana foul shout. I think he draws a good matchup against Havertz, but Gusto will have to wait for. I think there's quite a lot of uncertainty around where Gusto starts. If he starts at left back, fantastic value. If he starts at right back, not as good. But I don't think it's even certain that he does start. Just based on the fact that he was substituted at half-time in the last league game against Man United. So I would say wait for a bit more information, wait for the game today, see how Chelsea line up, and hopefully we'll have a bit more information based on that. Bruno Guimaraes foul involvements evens. Yeah, really like that price, Aaron. Thanks for that. Again, I checked these prices last night. Obviously on Wednesday, you're not seeing too many markets released. Haven't checked today. But that is a really nice price. I can see him even getting fouled 4 times. And again, he draws a good matchup to make fouls against Yates. So that's one to really keep an eye on. I would have thought 5 would be evens. But yeah, thank you for that. And I'll keep an eye on that market. Going back to Arsenal, the final sort of selection I have for this game is for Gabriel to register a shot. As I mentioned, not too big of a fan of backing centre-backs to have a shot whenever they only are reliant on set pieces. But Gabriel is a bit different, especially for this game. Obviously, he is the sort of main target from set pieces for Arsenal. He's registered a shot in 8 out of 14 games this season, and he's priced at 1.61 with Bet365. So just based on that, it sort of looks a fair price. But I think Arsenal struggle to create chances from open play in this game. They have done that just generally this season. They haven't been an exactly front-footed or progressive side. They haven't been particularly sort of entertaining to watch. And in games like this, where they do struggle to create chances from open play, they are extremely reliant on set pieces. And that's where Gabriel comes into play. If we look into the game against Newcastle, they only fashioned one shot on target in that entire game, and that was despite losing from the 15th minute. So they had a positive game state, yet still couldn't really manage to create anything to worry Nick Pope. And of the chances they did create, they were almost all from set pieces or sort of crosses. Gabriel did not manage a shot in that game, but it was Mikel Merino who did. He had the shot on target and he had 2 shots from set pieces. Against Inter Milan, again, Arsenal very reliant on set pieces, and Gabriel had 3 shots in total. So in this game against Chelsea, I think in these sort of derby games, we generally see teams quite evenly matched, especially when you have the home team who have a bit more to prove, I would say, being the underdogs. I do think Arsenal struggle. The one sort of factor to consider as an additional is the fact that Declan Rice is out of this game, or has been confirmed to be out by Arteta. Is that a big issue? Given that he's a set-piece taker, I would say probably not. I think Arsenal have enough players who can contribute in that regard, with the likes of Saka, potentially Zinchenko if he starts, Martinelli. I think they have enough players that can sort of put an accurate cross in. And if Gabriel is to be the target, 1.61 I think is a nice price. Obviously too short to back as a single, so you'll have to get creative, potentially adding sort of over 3.5 corners for Arsenal, just to try and boost that above evens. But as I say, for these sort of games where they're harder to predict, where game state might dictate how the game is played out, and obviously with that being hard to predict pre-match, you sort of want to lean towards sort of plus money, odds against angles, and focus on reducing stakes, at least in my opinion anyway. So that's 3 potential early angles for this game. As I say, I'll be taking bets much closer to kickoff, and I'll be finalising those over on Twitter. That is all the games to cover for this weekend. Thank you guys for tuning in. Thank you guys for your questions. Really appreciate it. Thank you for your support. Again, make sure you follow me over on Twitter if you're not already. All of my sort of bets will be posted on there. I'll also be posting sort of in-depth write-ups for a few of these games this weekend. And all my staking plans will be posted on Telegram. So again, make sure you're in that channel. Make sure you follow me on Twitter. Thank you for your comments. Thank you for supporting the stream. And I will see you all next Thursday. So I hope you all have a great day and hopefully a successful weekend of betting. So take care and thank you.